So one comedian who was like kind of in that world,
Yes.
Fox, etc.
Yeah.
That I tried to interview, his manager told me that he wouldn't do an interview with me because Rogan would get mad at him for talking to CNN.
They said to me at CNN, they're like, we're editing the interview. I said, put the hour out. I sat there for an hour and we had a nice conversation, but we talked for 1 hour and I was like, put it out. I'm like, I understand if you can't put it out. And then she goes like this, she goes, I can't believe you'd show up. People have said that they can't come on here because Joe Rogan would get mad at them. I said, that's absolutely ridiculous.
Why would I care?
said, he doesn't care. He would never care. I just said, put out the thing, put out the hour online. If you can only put out a few minutes on network, fine. But it's wrong to have someone come in and talk for an hour.
Right.
And then not
use 3 minutes.
And then use 5 minutes.
Yeah. So how much did they use?
We don't know yet. They haven't put it out.
So about a month ago, Tim Dillon was on the Joe Rogan Experience and was talking about how he did an interview with CNN and how they didn't want to put out the full thing without doing some major edits. And so on the podcast, he called them out and basically dared them to put out the full thing. And well, last week, CNN did. They released the full interview, which was over an hour and 10 minutes of a bunch of questions about Rogan, a lot of politics, which we won't get into, but also a few awkward confrontations. And now that it's finally out, I can see why they hesitated so much, because the whole interview did feel like a big attempt to get a gotcha moment against Rogan using Tim Dillon as a proxy. And although it didn't work and Tim came out on top, in my opinion, there were some interesting moments and things that were said that I wanted to talk about, because in the past, Tim has been called out and made fun of by other comics for having politicians on his show and not making fun of them. And he's also very close friends with Rogan, so technically he's a big Rogan sphere comedian, no pun intended, but the angle they took wasn't the best. Again, it really felt like the goal was to simply get whoever was closest to Rogan to scold them since they couldn't get a hold of Rogan. Almost like if CNN wanted to speak to the manager, but instead they got Tim Dillon. Now, to be fair, the lady doing the interview was very nice. She didn't hold back at times, but it didn't feel like a bad faith interview. For example, this question really caught me off guard and proved that Tim wasn't lying about what happened on that interview.
So one comedian who was like kind of in that world,
Yes.
Fox, etc.
Yeah.
That I tried to interview, his manager told me that he wouldn't do an interview with me because Rogan would get mad at him for talking to CNN. And
That's untrue. That's completely insane.
Okay.
That's completely insane.
Okay.
That is completely nuts. He was afraid of you.
Oh, okay.
He thought you were going to come in and really rough him up or something. There's no such thing as Rogan would be mad at someone for talking. That's crazy.
Oh, well, that's good
No.
to hear. Okay.
No.
Good. I'll let him know.
You think that's how it works? Rogan sends emails. I know you don't.
I
think
would-
that, but that's a crazy thing. Like Rogan's like, "What are you doing? Oh, you're doing this? No, do Gutfeld instead." No one cares.
I mean,
No one cares what anyone does, and the idea. I think people think life's very interesting. We see this with the QAnon people,
Right.
Where they're like, there's tunnels, and you go, it's really just rich people.
Okay.
And you go, well, but they're doing all these terrible things. You go, absolutely, but they always have, and a lot of them always probably will if they can get away with it. But the levels of intrigue that people build around these things, I don't find that they're not that super interesting. You know?
I just want to be clear though,
But no,
this
that's
didn't
just very
come
funny.
from. It didn't
But
come
it
from
would
like
be
a
funny
commenter.
if he canceled my appearance because of this. I can't imagine any manager saying that. I mean, that's.
Oh no, the
crazy.
manager I spoke to directly. in
No,
person.
I believe that they did. It's just such a funny and ridiculous thing.
Okay.
To me.
All right. Well, that's good to know. Do you think Rogan would talk to me?
I don't know. I mean, he's a big get.
I know.
He's a big
very
get.
important.
So I mean, you could try. I don't know if I had his money if I'd be doing any interview. I don't know if I'd be here. I think I would be on a boat. I probably wouldn't be doing a podcast. I'd be somewhere else. I don't know if you'd be able to find me with his level of income. I think I'd be gone.
So that was one of the first big gotcha questions that they threw at Tim, but he quickly shut it down without even thinking about it twice because it does sound silly. Now, I'm sure there are comedians who won't do certain shows like CNN because they don't want to support someone or something who was fighting with Rogan in the past. That's fair, but the way she framed it, it was clearly meant to make it sound as if Rogan himself was blacklisting comedians who were talking to the enemy. I don't think that's actually happening. However, the fact that she doubled down and confirmed that someone's manager did say that is so wild because if that's real, I feel like they should name the comic, drop the name. So that way that comedian knows that his manager is out there making him look like a Rogan puppet, or like if Rogan controls their career, that's embarrassing. But the real question is, who do you think she was talking about? Because I was thinking maybe Andrew Schulz. I mean, what other comic is close friends with Rogan, who's also been getting into politics enough that a news network wants to talk to them? Maybe Theo Vaughn. Who knows? It's impossible to know at this point. But the point is that even though Rogan for sure has a lot of influence over a lot of comedians and who they talk to and what shows they do, even if he doesn't tell them directly, again, that question was being used to fish for Rogan gossip. Like implying that podcast comedians can do shows like CNN because their podcast daddy would get mad at them. But Tim handled it very well. For example, this next question was also weird because she was trying to make it sound like only podcast comedians have been seeing massive success recently, which is absolutely insane. Obviously, that's not the case. And by the way, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps out so much and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
There's very, very successful comedians that are left of center comedians.
Like who?
I mean, what do you mean like who? Chelsea Handler. I think John Mulaney probably. I think that you would find Sarah Silverman. I think Bill Burr, Louis C.K. He's never voted for a Republican in his life. Why? Because he's an imperfect person? These are massively successful comedians. They're all more successful than I am. And there's nothing wrong with that. And they're all left-leaning comedians. Is there this idea that like they're not around or you can't find them? That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
No. But there's not this
great.
Cultural energy around.
They're not all as big as they were because I think careers go up and down.
I mean, I interviewed like a late night comedy writer who was like, this
Kimmel, Fallon.
This thing is spent, but like, but all those people who had the kind of like left-wing shows like Amy Schumer and Michelle Wolf, Samantha Bee, those have all been canceled. All those shows are canceled.
Well, but there'll be new ones. I mean, do you not have the faith? Do you think there's going to be no left-wing comedy?
I don't see like a little ecosystem or like a galaxy. I mean, you might dispute this, but like in the sort of right of center,
there's a galaxy
world,
there's
right?
An establishment.
There's Rogan, and there's all this stuff.
I mean, again, is Trevor Noah not popular? He does arenas.
No. Is he popular?
He's an arena comedian. He's one of the most popular comedians in the country. Hassan Minhaj, Ronnie Chang. These guys are all left-wing, and they're all really funny, really popular comics who I'm friends with and like.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I don't think this thing's happening. Whatever everyone thinks happening, I don't think is happening.
Why
this idea that like left-wing like where are they? Where are they? Where are they to be found? Where's Amy Schumer? I don't know. She's in her $15 million townhouse in Brooklyn. I think she'll be okay. I think these people will be okay.
But her show was canceled.
She just had a show on Hulu called Life in Bath. She just had a movie come out on Netflix. I mean, Amy's doing good.
Okay.
Yeah, they're fine. All these people are fine. I will text a few of them and go, people are worried about you.
Okay.
I think they're okay.
I mean, if they want to talk to me, I would love to talk.
Sure, I'll put you on a group text.
Do you think that represents like where the cultural energy is?
Where the culture seems to be so fractured, I don't know if there's a cultural energy that's moving in any direction.
Now, this part really made me laugh. I mean, watching the CNN lady trying to describe Joe Rogan as being in the center with comedians around him without using the term Rogan sphere was so funny and also weird because they're basically talking about a concept that used to be so niche that only, podcast fans used to use, and now they're saying it on national television. I mean, it's on YouTube, but you get the point. It's so strange. The last time that happened, it was last year when Cat Williams was on Shannon Sharp's podcast and said that Rogan always pushes the same unfunny comedians, the same 6 unfunny comedians all the time. And that back then was mind-blowing, listening to a comedian, a massive comic talking about the Rogan sphere without mentioning it. And now we're seeing people from TV that work for national television talking about it. I mean, at this rate, CNN's going to be reacting to Kill Tony episodes with a panel of experts. It's crazy. But when it comes to the Rogan sphere, it is a real thing, but not for the reasons they seem to think. It's not about politics, and instead, it's all about vibes and being part of a club. You don't get the Rogan exposure just because you're a brilliant comic. You get it because he likes hanging out with you. There's no auditions or castings to see who the funniest comic is. It's just vibes.
It's like your job shouldn't be easy. If you're gonna make that much fucking money, like, hey, maybe it should be a little hard. You know, I got no issue with that.
I love that line. You're a comedian. Do your job. It's just so perfect. You have the great line about just shitty comics trying to get on Rogan by saying that you're fighting this cause.
I think it's kind of groupthink. I think it's good for comedy when two comics are at odds or talking shit on each other. I think it's good for the art form.
Yeah,
but now
moves
everyone's
it.
got to be friends.
Right.
You've got to worry about what Joe thinks about these things. You know, and have Joe mediate fights. And I like Joe, but I don't get the whole like stand-up comedy. I got into it because you get to do it by yourself.
Right.
You go on stage alone.
Yeah, with your audience.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
these let's get a group together. I never understood it.
I know, I'm the same way. I have a real hard time with it.
And also, I don't know if she was trying to do a gotcha question or actually believes that only podcast comedians are seeing massive success right now because, again, that is not true. I mean, sure, maybe Rogan Sphere comedians have it way easier because they don't have to rely on the Hollywood machine, and instead they just need to go on Rogan a few times or be a regular on Kill Tony or whatever. But again, this whole idea that only podcast comedians are seeing massive success, it doesn't make sense because, for example, I saw Trevor Noah live a while back, maybe last year. A friend of mine had tickets, and I went in there with no expectations, with an open mind. And man, it was one of the worst shows I've ever seen in my life. It was way too long, I believe. It was over 2 hours long. He had no openers. However, you know, it was a sold out theater, a packed theater, and my friend was basically laughing the whole time. But at some point, I was just waiting for the show to be done because I was tired. It was way too long, and I felt like I had to stay. But now looking back, I should have left. And on top of that, they made everyone lock their phones up in those little bags. And so the point is that both sides have lazy comedians and lazy comedy. And it's not like one side has the best comedians in the world, but for some reason, they're not getting as much exposure as, you know, Rogan Sphere comedians. That's not what's going on.
Comedy's different now, and I think it's really interesting, and that doesn't mean it's bad. I'm not saying, are you bad?
I just thought when you say comedy's different, I understand what you mean because there's some popular comics that have a right of center point of view.
Yes.
But I think that was always the case.
But also people are moving to Austin. Every comedian has a podcast, and then they all go on each other's podcasts. Really? Why?
They're getting priced out, and they can't get the stage time they want, and they're coming back from Austin. I mean, that's going to be another.
Like, I wanted to go to Kill Tony, and I
Yeah.
can't buy tickets because they sell it within seconds.
Well, it's a very popular show.
And another comic I talked to who used to live in Austin
Yeah.
was saying, like, you go on Kill Tony, you do well, that can really make your career.
It can help for sure, but comedy careers are long things.
Yeah.
You have to work for a very long time. There are things, you have great moments, you have ups and downs, you have ebbs and flows. I don't know that anything makes a career. I think it's just a long, sustained attack.
I think you have to admit, like, Joe Rogan has changed comedy.
I think Joe Rogan has changed media.
Can you explain how that works?
Well, Joe Rogan has this amazingly popular platform where he's led by his interests, meaning like he's bringing on people that have these long-form conversations. In a world where everything's like consumed in like 30-second clips or 60-second clips and 15-second clips, Joe Rogan is having 3-hour discussions.
Rogan moved to Austin, opened a comedy club there, and now all these comedians have moved to Austin to be part of that world.
Yeah.
Like, how does that work? Like, what is that like?
I think it's like any type of clubhouse that you have, right? So you have like all of these different great clubs, and you have a Comedy Cellar in New York and Comedy Store in LA. And, you know, he's opened a great comedy club in Austin where we have a lot of people go there to perform and to there's a lot of comedy fans that go. So he's cultivated a lot of people that want to come, and he's made it kind of a destination for people that want to see comedy. Well, there's just not tons of people at his level that give opportunities to people the way he does.
Yeah.
There are some.
But does a young comedian have to shape his act to try to sort
Not
of
at
fit
all.
in that
Joe
role?
Rogan's one podcast. It's a very big podcast, but it's one podcast in a world of podcasts, in a world of social media apps. There are comedians that have blown up on TikTok who are selling out theaters. That why would they need to shape their act? Me, I would never shape anything.
Yeah.
Me and Joe like see a lot of things in a similar way.
Yeah.
Even though we're very different on paper, we see a lot of things in a similar way. So I didn't have to shape And I don't think people go in there shaping. It would be probably quite obvious if they did.
Now, the conversation about how much comedy has changed recently and what role Rogan played in all of that could have been very interesting, but I feel like she mainly focused on trying to paint this narrative that the only reason why Rogan's feared comedians are successful is because of Rogan. And, you know, there is some truth to that, but I feel like a better angle or a better question would have been to ask Tim what he thinks about podcast comedians versus real comedians, because at this point, it's pretty safe to say that there's a massive difference between the two, and that podcast comedians are a very real thing. For example, when it comes to real comics, they've talked about many times how they come up with material and jokes, and the way they do it is to basically go on the road and try their comedy at places where they're not really known or expected. That way they're not playing to just their own audience. But then when it comes to podcast comedians, the way they do it is they basically take a bit from their podcast or many bits from their show and then turn it into a comedy special, which is, you know, it's pretty wild because they're basically just pandering to their own audience and not really coming up with the best material. I mean, Joe Rogan himself admitted that the way he prepared for his live comedy special on Netflix was to only perform at his club.
I did my last special, my Netflix special. I prepared for it entirely at my own club. And then I hadn't done any theaters at all in like a year and a half. And then I did the first Friday night at the theater. I'm like, oh, it was different. Because instead of doing like 200 people, I was doing thousands.
Like for years, he didn't perform anywhere else but his own club. That's absolutely insane. I mean, I don't think performing in front of the same type of audience every single time is the best way to test if something is funny, especially if you're Joe Rogan at the mothership. I mean, think about it. If you're a Joe Rogan fan and if you go to the mothership and get to see Joe in a club setting, I mean, at that point, I feel like they would be the nicest audience ever and just laugh at anything he says. And so it would have been interesting to see what he thought about podcast comedians versus real comedians and if he considered himself a real one or a podcast comedian.
I just also don't know that, like, is he Trojan horsing all of this stuff so that he can go in there and like run a really race-based thing? Everything he said was kind of about class.
It was, yeah.
So again, it's a hard question to ask, right? Like, what's in his?
I know,
right? And it's a difficult thing to know.
It's the kind of
I've
question I have to ask. It's my job question.
I agree, and I understand that.
I'm wondering if you, now that so many politicians see comedians as a great place to talk for good reasons, not necessarily for bad, do you find yourself in the position where now you have to be more skeptical of people you normally would just like have a conversation with?
I think that absolutely that everybody who comes on a show, whether they're a politician or a huge tech person, has an agenda. And I think that those people are going to have varying degrees of, what would be the word, integrity. Otherwise, you'd only have the people on your show that you agreed with. You'd have a terribly uninteresting show. Yeah. Nobody would listen. Right. And you'd have to like get rid of all the politicians, all the tech people, all the big celebrities. Everyone that's a public person that has an agenda couldn't come on the show. And that would be crazy, right? Because these people are all peddling something, and you're going to sit there and talk to them because that's the job of anyone with a show, is to make it interesting. My job's not to save the country. My job's to have an interesting or entertaining show.
Isn't it to be funny?
It's to be funny, yeah. I think there were parts of the interview that were funny. I do a show with mainly no guests. Yeah. I have hours and hours and hours of talking. Most of it,
I've watched
a lot of it's funny. But I will occasionally have a guest, whether it's a friend or somebody that I find interesting. I think Steve Bannon said a lot of interesting stuff, you know? And
okay, one other thing.
Yeah, of course.
On his maybe Roman salute, he said to you like, "Oh, that was just a nanosecond, freeze frame." No, it wasn't.
Well, I didn't. I saw the thing, and he basically said.
Did you watch the video?
I watched the video, but his claim is that he was waving to a crowd.
But yeah, once again, it is funny how CNN clearly wanted Joe Rogan, but got Tim Dillon instead. It was almost like they tried skipping to the final boss fight without doing all the side missions. And again, Tim handled it very well because, you know, that was some valid criticism. I mean, I don't know how much I care about that. Like, do I think podcast comedians should be asking the tough questions? Yeah, I don't think so. I don't care. I mean, at some point, that was a cool thing about Rogan. You know, he was the only one actually bringing up the tough questions and talking about things that even other podcasters wouldn't talk about. And a lot of people forget about this, but the podcast used to be live streamed. And although I understand why that couldn't continue, you know, at this point, everything has changed. And so I don't think other podcasters have, you know, the responsibility of asking the tough questions. But I do think they should definitely focus on making it funny. Like if they have politicians on the show, it should be a funny or a weird conversation at the very least, and not about them trying to be modern day philosophers, in my opinion. But yeah, who cares? I mean, it is their show, their podcast, so they can do whatever they want, and we can say whatever we want. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Leave a like and subscribe to support the channel. Dislike if you didn't like the video. But that is all we have for today. See ya.